Okay. So can everyone see that?
Yep, thank you.
So welcome to our Soroptimist International virtual event in partnership with Women for Water Partnership, access to finances locally for women through gender budgeting. Then you see me there. Obviously, I'm the moderator, and welcome to everybody. Our three speakers will be Marit Verhoef-Cohen, and now we know Marit from long gone because Marit is a past international president and currently the president for Women for Water Partnerships. Lisa Whitmer, and I'll put your bio in the chat, Lisa, and Maria Fornello. I'll put yours in the chat as well, Maria. Thank you. So I'd like to start off and introduce with Marit to go ahead. I'll just see. Oh, I don't.
Yes, this is fine. Thank you very much, Lee. And of course, I'm delighted to be able to say a few words at the start of this side event of the CSW 68. It's a shame that we can't be there as Women for Water, but I'm very happy that that we've got this this webinar. Of course, as everyone knows, the subject of this evening, this morning, afternoon, evening for some, is on access for women to financing of local activities, gender budgeting, and economic justice to address women's poverty. So, in short, Women for Water is is a network of women organizations, and our member projects and programs focus mainly on contributing to equitable access to safe, qualitative water and sustainable development. And that is why we link SDG 5, gender equality, women empowerment, and SDG 6, water for all. We see access to safe and good quality water and sanitation for all users as key to women's empowerment and improving the quality of water and sanitation, governance and management. And the members of Women for Water and their communities focus on the inclusion of women from day one, from decision-making about starting a water project or any sort of project or program, to water quality, to investments, allocations of means, of course, finance and budgeting, design, planning, implementation, and don't forget the monitoring and evaluation of programs. And that is also something we have done together with Soroptimist International. Capacity development, both at institutional and in individual level, remains a crucial aspect. And through lobby and advocacy, we ensure that decision makers, science and technology take on board the local realities. And that is why Women for Water collaborates with partners and like-minded organizations like Soroptimist International. That we do that in as well as outside of the water domain to increase its effectiveness and to empower women in the rather male-dominated water domain. So, in many countries, women are responsible for water issues in the household as well as for productive use. And still, women are often excluded from decision-making processes about water and water management. And their knowledge and experience, of course, are not often recognized. Projects must listen to women's concerns. Women know their environment and circumstances better than anyone and their male colleagues, but still these women are not consulted. When, for instance, new water infrastructure are discussed or decided on. Women should be part of the planning and the decision making to make it a success. And of course, there are always challenges with new water infrastructures, but include the voices of women as they know what the impact is for their local communities. And on this slide, you can see why water and women issues are so close together. Last year, March, so it's a year ago now, during the UN Water Conference, the UN asked for voluntary commitments, and Women for Water and our partners made commitments. There are quite a number. And one of us is enabling women as actors in the water domain. Although the role of women, and most of you probably know that, in water management has been recognized ever since 1992, meaningful participation of women in planning, implementation and access to resources, for instance, land and water rights and financing, it is still all lagging seriously behind. Access to safe and good quality water and sanitation for all users is key to women's empowerment and independence, economic independence. To enable women, it is vital to ensure access to vocational training, acknowledge their competences formally, and ensure timely, adequate information and knowledge, and have quota and regulations in place to ensure their involvement and give women access to financial means directly. I think you missed out yeah. I think
Sorry, thank you.
No, don't worry. It can stay on for a while. Don't worry. So, and to that end, Women for Water, to the financial means that have to be given to women directly, Women for Water will set up a campaign to work with our partners to develop other methodologies for distributing available funding to the ground. And gender budgeting is a way for governments, companies, and non-governmental organizations to promote gender equality using administrative and fiscal policy. It involves understanding the difference in the budget's impact on men and women and subsequently. I'm sure Lesha will go more into detail about all this. Often the issue for the financing is that there is finance for instance, building of the water structure or a new structure, but there's not enough budget for maintenance and financial support for the local communities. That is often not reaching the local women. Donors and sponsors need to change their current procedures so that this will indeed happen. And out of our own experience, we know that procedures make it impossible for small organizations and women organizations in particular to apply for finances. And there is no trust that they can perform and manage it. It's still the old feeling that women cannot handle money. Agriculture and water, for instance, are intertwined, and giving support, also financial support, to small and medium enterprises ensures, especially run by women, is absolutely crucial. So in this last slide, which is the next one, this is a slide, okay, leave it here. In this slide, you will see the different approaches of how women are involved in projects, but that is a slide of Lesha, and I'm sure she will come back to that slide. So today, our speakers will highlight the gender-sensitive budgeting methodology. If gender-sensitive budgeting is used, it might help to have a better understanding of investments in infrastructure and maintenance. This methodology is to make it more equitable. The importance is the criteria for budgeting and to look how the budget is implemented and what the impact is. Inclusion of women needs a special effort. And even now, although this has been promoted for a long time, we still are hammering on that this is so very important. And when they actually do this, better results are guaranteed. And we have found that in many of our reports, that if women get involved and if women have the finances to actually do what they need to do, the results are fabulous. So I wish you all a constructive, a positive, and a very fruitful event that will have an impact on more funding and financing directly being available for women and local organizations, of course, which again contributes to the implementation of the SDG 5 and 6. And thank you for your attention. And I'll listen to all of you, your speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariet. You have been the guru to me for Women for Water for many, many years. And the knowledge you have is something that we need to regularly tap into, because you've been around the world advocating for Women for Water for how many years now?
10.
10 years, yes. You have accrued amazing knowledge on this subject. Thank you very, very much. I'd now like to go on to Lisa Whitmer, also Women for Water Partnership. Thank you, Lisa. You might need to let me know when you want the next slide.
Yeah, this slide can go on. This is...
I think we can close this one. Yeah, that's
okay.
the one. That's the one.
Okay.
Okay, ladies, it is wonderful to see you all, although online. But I see there's at the moment 31 of us, so that's a good sign. And so sorry that Mariet and I couldn't be with you. Some of you know that my main reason is that I broke my hip a few months ago, and that they botched up 2 of my operations, so that I'm still struggling. So I want to talk to you about the findings of research that we did. And I think it is a bit exceptional because there is not that much in-depth research done on funding and funding mechanisms by women's organizations. Of course, there are organizations that have done research on finance and funding for women. But that was mainly, let's put it this way, how can we help them? And what projects should be funded to assist the women? Now, what we did in this particular research, and we can go to the next slide, please, is how much financial support is actually reaching women's organizations directly. So it's not somebody else who is spending money on behalf of the women, but it is actually in their own pockets, in their own accounts, for their own projects. The second one is, what is good practice? How does it work? What drives funding reaching them or not? What are enabling factors and what are the bottlenecks? And what are or could be effective strategies for this? And just one more remark on this. We looked at finance and funding, which is coming from external sources. So, for instance, we're not talking about all the wonderful financing projects that Seroptimus do, or Business and Professional Women or Zonta, because there it's the women financing the women. That we did not explicitly research in this project. But however, some of the conclusions come from our joint experience in how we actually reach our constituency and the chapters of the different organizations in the different countries. So there are lessons to be learned, but it was not specifically part of this research. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if you look at the big funders in the world, ODA, so Official Development Assistance, from international NGOs, private funders, then you'll see that there are schemes around to fund local communities, sometimes explicitly women, lots of times a local civil society organization. And if you look at their websites and you look at their calls for grants, proposals, you will see that they do have a dedicated mechanism for that. But it's still the exception to the rule. So of all the big funds and funders we looked into, we actually found no more than 15 worldwide that actually have a visible strategy and a methodology that we can actually check. So they actually do provide transparency. And of course, what was a big disappointed when I spoke to a lot of them was that they said, oh yeah, Lesja, no, you're right, we are doing this, but we stopped doing it. Oh, is it still on our website? I said, yeah, it is. That's why I'm calling you. And they said, well, it was so difficult, we stopped doing it. So out of the ones that I found, only a very few were actually left. So it is the exception to the rule. It is not very transparent. And the approaches, would you believe, are totally different. It can be revolving funds, guarantees or risk mitigation for local banks and utility, blended finance, small seed funding, joint investment, loads and loads of different methods. So obviously, not only we, but also they are still struggling. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we found is that the way they make their choices for funding and also how funding actually reaches the women's organizations depends very much on the way that the women have approached their own involvement or worked with partners. So one is, let's say, the most basic one is that women are involved in the implementation of a project. But as Mariet already rightly stressed, not necessarily in decision-making around that. But they do work for the activities, they have their own activities, but they are involved. The second one is women-only projects. So here it is really the women's local group or chapter or that is doing the project, and everything is controlled by them. So the design, the implementation, reporting, decision-making, everything is done by them, which is great. Of course, it bears a risk that you're doing it as a isolated group of women, and that in the long run, you might not get the support to continue and make it bigger, because there you would need more other organizations to join you. The third one is systematic inclusion. And this means that whoever is organizing the project very deliberately includes women from day one, and they are involved in all levels of organizing this activity. So it's in the design, it is in the financing, it's in the implementation, it's in the reporting, it's in the monitoring. All the phases of a project, they are involved. And of course, the type of involvement can differ depending on the type of project and the phase it's in, but this is really inclusive. Those projects are rare. So, having said that, this also makes a difference in how donors look at should we give money to them for a project. In the last category, systematic inclusion, what you see is that there is funding, although they have to fight for it. Lots of times it comes as an afterthought, so it was not in the original budget. But because the women said, hey, hello, we're here as well, and we want to be a full partner, so some of the finances and funding should also go to us. Then they say, oh, yes, of course, and they add a budget line. So there is still a tricky part in that it's in a lot of cases, it is still not in the original budget lines and estimates for the project, that also the women have financial means. Next slide, please.
Right.
One down. Yep. No, one more.
Going forward, sorry.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry. Thank you, Lisa. Sorry.
No, it's okay. What most of the respondents have in common, and this is both when it goes well and when it goes wrong. What they have in common is that they all have a serious intent to facilitate local groups. If you look at the policy of the country or the policy of that particular funding agency, donor, sponsor, they really would have the intent to finance and facilitate those local groups. Having said that, the problem starts. The first one is that the timelines for by the donor are very long. They take forever. So in some cases, that means that the group that submitted the proposal is waiting. But a lot of them also have the negative effect that the timelines, which are usually already short, get even shorter, because they take the time that they need for their decision making off the time that was actually intended for the project and the activities. Then there is sort of like a bias, if you will. So a lot of the funding that comes available is oriented on service provision. So getting drinking water, building toilets, maybe do an irrigation system for the local farmers. But it's very service provision, as I would call it. And there is very little funding for capacity development. So actually really training the women, certifying the women for reporting. And a lot of time goes into very complicated and very detailed administrative procedures. And there I have to make the remark that a lot of the criteria seem to mainly reflect Western thinking in terms of criteria. And this is not just the people who live in the North or in the West. Also, donor agencies and sponsors from other regions in the world seem to have adopted the same accountancy methods and the same administrative procedures. So this is, although it stems from the Western world, it is not a Western world practice. The second is that there is very little acceptance of national and local legislation and circumstances. And that is a problem. So, for instance, if you want to prove that you are a legal entity and that you can receive money, and you don't have a chamber of commerce, or there is no clear procedure in the country, or you don't want to apply because it's dangerous to apply for official status, a lot of the donors will not accept anything that you do, although there might be other procedures in practice available to prove that you do exist and that you are legitimate. But they don't accept them. So, for instance, there is a practice in smaller communities, especially a lot in Asia, that the mayor of the town, the elected official, can actually sign a letter saying, oh yes, I know this organization and they do exist, and you know, this kind of thing, which is totally acceptable for their standards, but not accepted by the formal sponsors. Or another route we tried, if there are 3 or 4 organizations that do have legal status and they give a reference, yes, we know this group, we have worked with them before, yes, they're reliable, they don't accept that. So this is a really, really a big hurdle for a lot of especially the smaller women's organizations and civil society organizations. So, yeah, and then there is the perceived constraint, because in some cases it's simply not true, but they all talk to each other and say, oh, no, this is the only way you can do it, and nobody goes back to the original documents and actually checks it. And then they say, no, we can't give it directly to a local organization. It has to go through a national government. Or it's not allowed to finance certain issues because the original donor doesn't allow for it. And if you go to the original donor, they say, oh yeah, sure, it's allowed. But they put that into their heads and they're not using it. So that is another real problem. And of course, what doesn't help is that in a lot of countries, they are so afraid for fraud and you know, misuse of funds that their measures go completely over the top. Although there is also research in the world that actually prove that the most reliable group to give money to, and if you're lending it to them, you'll get it back, are actually women's organizations. Next slide, please. So being a legal entity is a big issue. A second one is to prove that they have received the funds before. So a lot of them use as a criterion that you have to show your annual accounts, that you have to show that you can handle this amount of money. And of course, if you are a new organization or never received any funding from outside, that is impossible. So it basically means that new entries, new initiatives already stop there because they're not recognized because they don't have already an annual account that shows that they got money and could handle money. A third big problem to get especially money from bigger organizations to the ground is the high administrative cost. And this is true. This is very true. However, in a lot of cases, it is true because their procedure is so complicated that the time spent by the people of the donor themselves is higher than the whole project. So there, we really have to talk to them and find out if we can not do it a little bit simpler. And then the last one, a big headache for a lot of people is the accountancy rules. And this is what I call asking for an invoice for that you bought a paperclip in the Sahara. So they're asking for invoices, receipts for very small amounts of money. And also where in areas where maybe a lot of these people can't even read and write. They are absolutely, totally capable of doing the project, but writing a receipt, they've never done that and they don't have the paper for it even. So sometimes if I go to this type of projects, I have all these very small pieces of paper in my pocket and a pen, and I write it out, you know, on the spot for them and then have them sign. But of course, it's ridiculous that you have to do that for €3, €5 equivalent. Next slide, please.
A little slow, Lisa.
Yeah. Okay, then a few ones, I go a little bit faster, is that loans, especially for sanitation or grants, are still seen as a luxury. And then local banks, local financiers say, we're not going to give them a loan or a grant for that because this is a luxury. They should buy it themselves. This is really a problem and something that some of our colleagues are really trying to fight. So it's not seen as a necessity, but as a consumable, a luxury. Another one is that some of the donors and sponsors insist that you have to have estimates. Now, of course, if we're wanting to spend €100,000 or more, and we're doing this not at a totally local level, okay, there's some sense in there because you want the best service and the best price. But in other cases, it's totally ridiculous. If you are a community with 200 people and you are forced to ask for an estimate, 3 estimates, then, you know, chances are, first of all, that the prices will go up, even if you can get them. Because people think, oh, there is, you know, an external funder and I can ask more money. And secondly, part of the whole trick in asking for the money is that these people can do it themselves. They are quite capable of doing it themselves or with help of local colleagues. So this is also a hiccup, a hitch in the way that they see this type of proving that what you're doing is above board. So last one in this category, a lot of the local organizations, women's organizations, have no access to ICT or web-based tools. A very recent report from OECD and UN Women and the World Bank actually looked into how many women do have a bank account and can pay their own bills. And what they found was actually quite extraordinary. One is that the amount of women actually having the possibility to pay their bills with a mobile phone went up enormously. So that the percentage now is above 40%, which compared to before, where it was almost 0. Now, this sounds wonderful, but it isn't. Because what happens is that because the local banks say, okay, but you can have a mobile phone with and then pay with that, there are still more than 40% of women in the world that don't even have a mobile phone or have access to the website. So it is good for some, but not for all. Secondly, it doesn't mean that you get all the services of a bank, so that you can get credits, that you can have a savings account, that etc. It only means that you can pay a payment through a mobile phone. So this doesn't really solve the problem, although there is progress. Hooray. Next slide, please. Okay, gender budgeting. Marieke was already referring to it. Gender budgeting in general, and some use the term gender sensitive, gender dedicated, well, all kinds of additives to it, but I'll stick to gender budgeting because for me, basically all the different names and all the different tools that have been developed for this are good stuff. You know, for me, there's not a big difference between one that calls itself just gender budgeting and another one that says gender sensitive, or that's more the mindset, but not the tool. So what it does, it is designed, and there are several different methodologies around, is trying to bridge the gap between men and women and to see if the budget and the spending actually reflects the intent. Because sometimes the idea is wonderful, but then the impact of how the money is allocated, how the activity is done, is, although they didn't expect that, and that's part of the problem, they didn't expect it, works out very differently for men and women. So you could say it in another way, say gender budgeting is an application of gender mainstreaming in the budgetary process. It is mainly governments that do that, but that means national government and local government, both. So what it does is it takes stock of and makes visible the impacts of the budget that were allocated and available. And it is the starting point of gender budgeting work. And it gives insight. Like all numbers and all analysis, it tells you what the reality is, regardless of the original intent. Next slide, please. Another slide. Yeah. No, that's one too far.
Too fast, sorry.
No, it's okay.
You'll go back.
No, one down. One down. No, that's fine. You can go to the next one. I think I covered this. So what are main lessons from, oh, let me add that if some of you are interested more in the gender budgeting, we're quite happy to explain it more in detail, but the time was a little bit short for that today. And it is a little bit technical in essence. But yeah, for instance, one of our member organizations, TGMP, is very, very good at it. And they just had a big success because they were asked actually officially by the Tanzanian government to help them analyzing their spending and whether what they intended to do worked or not. What it also does is it keeps it on the agenda. It looks at consistency, and it helps in having clear accountability measures. So what we need to do and look at is a couple of things. One, you need to really know your constituency, apologies, and the culture that you're going to work in. For allocating funding, asking for funding, you need very clear objectives, measurable targets, and a sound budget. And people have to be involved in the drawing of it, and also make sure that in the end there is a bankable project, as the bankers call it. So that all the elements that they need to make a decision are in there. And there is lots of good people around that can help local organizations to actually teach them how to make a better proposal, also in terms of finance. Then what also is needed, and I think that was also the plea from Mariet, organizations have to change their HR policies and regulations. Because what is not going to help is that we go back to differences in payment between men and women, differences in who is in the finance department. There are very little women in the finance departments. So apart from that, we think it's a good idea to have more a gender balanced workforce. It also helps with the funding. So I think I'll go to my last slide. Yes. Yeah, that's it. So we concluded that the interests of donors and sponsors to actually get more funding to the ground is very high. And an example of that is that in the UN water meeting yesterday, there is a task force on innovation, and one task force is on innovation in finance, and they agreed to go into researching more on methodologies for getting funding to the ground and how we can develop them or change them. So for me, that was a big step. And the second one that happened is that OECD, who do a lot of research, as all of you know, in this type of things, also said that they're highly interested. So we believe that our reporting and our research actually had a first result, that some of the bigger organizations in the world that sit on the money or research the money are actually getting there and saying, okay, we're going to work on this. So if you come across anybody during CSW that says, oh, it is so difficult for us to get the money to the ground, tell them we're happy to share ideas. We're happy to build capacity for them, to help. So blow the horn and tell them money has to go to the ground. And we women know what we're talking about. We did the research. We are the receivers, but we're also the funders. So help us. And I think, Lee, I'll stop here. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. It's such very, very important research that you've done. And it doesn't just show gaps, it shows how broken the system is. There's hardly one positive thing there, was there? It was just quite amazing. It also indicates to me that the major role of civil society and NGOs, we're almost in between the recipients and the bureaucratic side, that we have to make it work. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
True.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Now we have one of our SI, United Nations representatives from New York here, Maria Fornella on gender responsive budgeting as a tool towards gender equality. So this is like an education for all of us, for everyone to support what you've been going through. So thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about the last few points that Lisha was mentioning. So I think it follows quite well. So gender responsive budgeting as a tool towards gender equality. I'm talking about governmental budgets, which determine the access of citizens to goods and resources and services. So the allocations of budget of any resources is really indicative, and that's the next one, please. Indicative of government priorities. Next slide.
Back
No,
up one, two.
the second one,
Sorry.
yeah. Just because I wanted to show this one because it's something very well said, but it's another way of saying it is indicative of government priorities. A budget reflects or should reflect the values of a country, who it values, whose work it values, who it rewards, and who and what and whose work it doesn't. So this was a South African parliamentarian that said it, and I like it very much, but I think you should, before the reflects, you should say a budget should reflect, because as we know, we are still under a power structure, a patriarchal power structure, and budgets not always reflect the values of the vulnerable, especially women, and of the most marginalized. Second one. I mean, third slide. Yeah. So you were talking about the value of NGOs, Lee, and it's indeed, you see it in this topic very much so. Again, we can call it gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, gender sensitive. I'm going to keep it short, as Lisha said, gender budget. But over the past 25 years, NGOs have normalized the notion that the public should have a say. So we take small steps, as you can see. NGOs have worked and demanded that the public should have a say in public budget decision-making. And today they're much more transparent. There's in a study by the International Partnership for Budgets, 20% increase in global fiscal transparency scores. And this is all thanks to CSO, yes, public participation, citizens asking for it, and NGO advocacy. In spite of that, the bad news is that inequality has grown over the past 3 decades, and the official gender pay gap, although it has shrunk, the official one, 10.8 trillion a year in unpaid care work globally is done by women and not taken into consideration by JDPs. And on top of that, you know that the feminization of poverty is also a real phenomenon. So women are more likely to live in poverty than men. Next slide, please. So the gender budgeting or gender responsive budgeting, whatever you want to call it, is a powerful tool to help reduce inequality. It integrates gender into policies and processes of public financial management. It's a strategy that promotes the goal of gender equity, among others, right? But this is focusing on public resources, how they are collected and how spent. It also promotes accountability and transparency in fiscal planning and an increase in women's participation in budget process to advance the gender equality agenda. So there's a more general way of, there's a more general term that refers to many policies, and most of you know it, and that's mainstreaming or gender-based analysis. That's the broader approach to the evaluation and comparison of an impact of different policies and measures the different impact on women and men. But budgets are thus one of the many aspects of mainstreaming, and a very difficult one, I think, detailed and complicated, and it's not doing very well. As we will see, we'll have some cases to prove it. Okay, next one. This there is a renewed interest in gender budgets, because as I'm going to show later on, it's not a new concept at all. And if you're from Australia, you probably know, because gender budgeting started in Australia in 1984. But COVID was seen as an opportunity, since so many things were shifted and so many things changed and transformed. So the IMF and UN Women, in a post-COVID decision, decided to train relevant ministries and agencies on gender budgeting. There was a 2022 Latin American workshop that highlighted how COVID had deepened longstanding gender gaps, disproportionately affecting women who are responsible for childcare and were even responsible for education during COVID, which was remote. So the mother had to be there. And women are overrepresented in low-wage sectors, in the informal sector, very important, including care, and the areas most in the rest of areas most impacted by the crisis: tourism, health, education, and food industry. Next. My voice is terrible and my eyes are terrible. I think I'm dehydrated, so I'm sorry, bear with me. Please bear with me. So
it's the weather, Maria.
Yes, they developed, IMF together with UN Women are the most involved. The money is in UNDP and UNIFEM, but the guidance and the on gender budgeting policies, it's a real roadmap that they've given us. So as considered a powerful tool to help reduce inequality, it has to follow the budget has to follow a certain process doing, and again, I needed to clarify this. It's not a separate budget for women. It is integrated into the main budget of the government at the highest level most of the time, because you need a legal framework, as I'm going to say next. But what the IMF and UN Women say is that first you need a gender needs assessment, which services women rely on more heavily. You also need a gender impact assessment. How have the policies so far, related to everything that has been said before, really reached women, or have been diverted, or have been changed, shifted during the budget cycle, even if the intention of the policy was to reach women. So those two have to be, no, excuse me, I have one more.
Sorry. Change the photo.
So before you go to a really resource allocation, marking budget allocations, tracking funds, and policy evaluation and performance audits, you have to do all that. There is a previous capacity building effort in order for countries to do the needs assessment and the impact assessment. Then the budget changes, and then you assess again. Okay, next. And that's, I already mentioned, it requires capacity building. This is the same as I just said. To identify policies that impact women.
Sorry, Maria.
That's fine. No, that's fine. But transparency in the different stages of the budget cycle is, of course, important. This has to do with disaggregated data. We need to display expenditures by gender. We need a lot of disaggregated data, and this is also something that requires capacity building. Okay. So gender needs, gender impact, reallocation, and then the evaluation period, tracking gender-focused funds, policy design, what has worked and what hasn't. Okay, next. The successful reforms, there's successful cases that we have found in our research. They are tied to a solid legal and regulatory framework that supports reform. So whether they do it or not, and how they do it, there has to be a champion for this at the highest level. In the central, yes, the slides will be shared. I see there's a question there. The central government has to be in charge. There has to be a legal and regulatory framework developed, clear allocation of responsibilities to different actors. And of course, lately we are linking it to the Sustainable Development Goals because SDG is part of a whole with cross-cutting goals, targets, and indicators across the others. How can you separate eradication of poverty and food security, 1 and 2, from 5, which is gender equality, or from 8, decent work, or 10, equality, social equalities. So yes, next. This is as old as CEDAW, 1979. The idea was already there. Then the Beijing Platform for Action. These two were the cornerstones of gender responsive budgets. As you see, it takes a long time, and there have been waves of trying it and then pulling back. Of course, government change, it's not a very continuous process, but once institutionalized, it becomes continuous. So the budgets were identified by CEDAW as a very important tool to advance gender equality. Integration of a gender perspective in budgetary decisions, and adequate financing for specific programs for securing gender equality. All these are articles in the Beijing platform, as well as systematic reviews and adjustments. Again, evaluate post reforms to increase effectiveness of government allocation. So I wanted to show that the legal framework, yes, we're talking about a country's legal framework, but really it comes from above. We have already had it with CEDAW and the Beijing. That's when it starts, when the wonderful idea that hasn't been implemented starts. Okay, next, please. Next slide.
Sorry, it's just a little slow.
Oh, okay. So recently there has been a revolution almost in Europe with cities adopting gender budgets. And there is after COVID, there is this feverish attempt to do it once and for all. All G20 countries have enacted gender-focused fiscal policies, and the IMF has designed a gender budgeting index based on its 4 pillars of strong legal framework, collection of disaggregated data, genderless assessments. Genderless, pardon me, I said genderless. Genderless assessments. And but what they notice is that they might have the intention, but they have very limited budgetary tools to operationalize, evaluate, monitor, and audit. In other words, it's not a simple process. It's very complicated, very intricate, convoluted, and that's why we will see that more women need to specialize on this, and we need to dedicate time to this, but this comes later. Even NGOs are specializing nowadays. Okay, I'll talk about that later. Thank you. Next. This is actually the gender budget representation, the index. As you can see, Canada and Mexico doing well, Europe too, especially Spain and France, but also Austria, which might be the little dot over there. Latin America is trying very hard, but they are in the middle. They are doing a lot of workshops. They're preparing themselves. Mexico is doing well, and you will see why later on, because I have a kind of an explanation for that. It started early. The mobilization started early. Okay, and the United States doesn't give any data to this respect, and they haven't even ratified the main conventions. But the United States has other tools to do this. And I realized that from my ILO workshop yesterday. The Department of Labor were there, and even though the United States sometimes doesn't sign or ratify at the high level at Congress, the agencies and the ministries do more, thank God. Congress is useless. Thank you, and next. Levels of gender budget, in most cases, they start at national level, but there's as I said before, there's an increasing global trend to do so at subnational and local levels. Why is this? Because it makes sense, and it has a lot to do with the previous presentations. The spheres of government closest to the people are the ones that see the needs, and also people have more access to their mayor or their local, their village assemblies, whatever, assembly. They are best placed to address inequalities by collecting and processing and analyzing sex disaggregated data, also because they're smaller units. Oxfam has started several programs for small-scale farmers focusing on productive systems that benefit women. Oxfam is big on gender budgeting at the local level, engaging citizens and identifying best practices and working with local governments and grassroots NGOs in Ethiopia, in Ghana, and Tanzania. These are three examples only, but they are in other places too. And yes, next. Gender budgeting levels continued. In Italy, it's an interesting case because it was started at the local level and later moved upward. In Albania, when you see countries that are in the less developed or developing world, they have a lot of help from UN Women and UNIFEM. Albania is doing it right by a system of appointing gender equality employees in every line ministry to collect and analyze data and conduct gender analysis to inform local policy development. So doing it, like from the grounds up, building the capacity from the grounds up. In Ecuador, it has been given the highest possible level of recognition, and gender equality is included as a constitutional principle. And this was exactly UNIFEM. It was a UNIFEM and UN Women program, gender responsive budgeting, and it was funded by Belgium. Next. In Spain, Spain is one of the big examples, together with Mexico, that are making progress in gender budgeting. They've been using it since at national and subnational administrative budget since 2007. And the Andalusian region administration, for instance, has developed and implemented a methodology that they call the G+ program to classify all programs to the extent they impact on gender. And their findings are wonderful. And of course, it should be obvious to authorities: an expansion of after-school services for children, a rise in women's ownership of agricultural holdings, a great focus on combating violence against women, and an increase in female university professors from 13%, excuse me, I am going to close this, in 2008 to 20% in 2015. Okay, next. French example, there are many French examples at city level. I think it started in Grenoble, but Lyon, the largest French city, is the largest French city to adopt a gender responsive perspective in its budget. They went straight for sports facilities, cultural activities. So I thought about Soroptimist, of course, when I was doing this research. Sports facilities, cultural activities, and the third one, not so much a Soroptimist topic, but urban planning, are considered through the prism of a gender-sensitive budget. Urban planning is one of the important sectors where there's a lot being done on gender budgeting. For instance, women's sports clubs are to receive as many subsidies as men's clubs, and urban infrastructure improvements are addressing public toilet and street lighting, which is an issue of safety needs for women. Thank you. Next. Okay, this is just a picture of the Lyon women's football team, soccer football team when they became champions. Next. Austria is also, in Austria, of course, is also a constitutional principle. The city of Vienna has done a lot of urban planning and it started from the women's office, and later the coordination office. Roll out gender mainstreaming in the planning, civil engineering, and building construction, followed by 60 gender-sensitive programs in urban planning. So Austria is the champion of urban planning and gender budgeting, connecting both. Okay, that's good. Thank you. The Kerala example, Kerala is a state in India. India started very early. It was later institutionalized. At first, they started as a separate fund, but then they integrated, and Kerala introduced participatory planning at the local level with the intention to transfer 30% of the state development funds to local bodies based on a needs assessment by the local assemblies. This was a very interesting case, but it wasn't very successful at the lowest level. It was more successful at the state level, and even at the national. I don't have the data. The problem, if you go to the next one, I don't know if I have it on. Oh yeah, this is the cover page of the budget in Kerala, and you see it's all women doing different types of work, and of the gender budget cover. And this is the boy, the 9th grade boy that designed it. In Kerala, I think I have it on the next. What happened? Yeah, because yes, next. The participation in the budget is very important. Women, the public should participate, and women should participate in the budget planning. They don't go to, the two concepts are coming together now, but participatory budget just meant, citizens at the local level participating, having a say, and it started in Porto Alegre, Brazil. They don't have a common origin, but they try to meld them to join them in many places, and in Latin America, it's done well with UNIFEM direction. In several cases, the focus was more on the benefits approach and not on a rights-based approach. So it was very limited. And what happened in Kerala, I don't know if I have it on a slide, so I keep saying that, was that money was given to, next. I hope that it's in the next one. I might have removed it. No. Okay. There should be one in between, yeah. Oh, well, no, just go back and I'll explain what happened in Kerala. At the very local level, at the village level, which is called the Panchayat Assembly in India, the women were participating, but they were really lobbying and favoring their group, their men. It was, there wasn't a woman perspective. The women participated, but didn't favor women. The benefits didn't, they just went to where they thought, to their family, to their clan, to whatever, to their group. And that was very frustrating for UNIFEM that was helping. And they said, because the state level government is more developed and it's based on rights, it worked better. So this is just to show you that you think it should work really well at the most local level, but it doesn't always happen that way, because you need a legal framework. You need legislation, you need regulation, etc. Okay. Next one, and then I'll be done. This one, it's my favorite. The governmental approach used by NGOs specializing in budget analysis and technical and analytical skills, economic knowledge, is one way to do it. The other way is the rights-based approach, like mobilization, legal, political, specializing in defense of women's rights. What happened in Mexico was these two organizations, the two major ones, Fundar, which is more of a think tank, if you want, or a research group, came together with Equidad y Género, which is the political, you know, the women's rights defenders, the big feminists. Some of you may know some, for example, Emilia is from Equidad y Género. That wonderful collaboration led to a budgetary study on reproductive health, analyzing public spending aimed directly toward women. It was a dismal 0.03%, and a broad media campaign started by the two NGOs, but with the help of newspapers and other media, led to the government addressing the problem, allocating more funds directly to women, and start collecting disaggregated data. From that moment on, Mexico is doing a good job in capacity building. They are still not implementing completely. Thank you. And then the next one is a conclusion. So there are some serious challenges to effectively implementing gender budgeting, whether it is in the north, the south, the east, or the west. There's a lack of guidance and coordination and expertise in gender analysis and data. That's why it's so important to have one of these agencies lead you by the hand. But the surveys also reveal the keys to success. Again, the framework, legislative requirement, an overview, and a Ministry of Finance that is committed to this policy tool. You need policy champions, as everywhere. Better analysis, better reporting would make better representation would make the policy more visible and more compelling. And I have one more thing to say, and Lisha alluded to it. We really want more representation of women in this type of, in the public finances. According to UN Women and the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, in a development initiative that they did, only 11% of countries have finance portfolios held by women, and less than a third of all heads of national audit offices are women. So we also need to ensure that these women are champions and that male leaders become champions, because they need to be attuned to the different challenges that women face, and they will reap results too. But few government provide disaggregated data, and so that's always a problem. Okay, well, I think I've talked enough, so I'll stop here. If we have discussion, this is good enough, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Maria. A lot of information, valuable information for us to know, and it's now on a presentation for us to take further. Thank you. Sorry, just a reference page from Maria. Now we have Q&A. So can I ask, Deborah, any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we have one question, Lee, from Danelle Davis. And Danelle asks, what have we learned since 1984?
Oh, that's the gender budgeting from Australia. I noticed they're in a low or in the mid section of implementation as well. Who would like to take that? Maria or Marit? Alicia?
I'll try something, Lee.
Thank you.
I think there are two things. One is that initially, also, if you look at some of the data and the sources that Maria was referring to, there was an uptake in the 90s of things like gender budgeting, trying to involve local women's groups and this kind of thing. And then it stalled. And I think at the moment, the situation is actually worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago, when there was more, and governments especially were more receptive to it. But that's a trend we see also in other issues. I think what we have learned is that a lot of but the gender budgeting tools can really help to make people aware that although things are well intended, that they can work out totally wrong in the way that money is allocated and measures are taken. There is a little bit of progress that more women are working in the financial sphere and getting appointed to as a Minister of Finance, for instance, but it's still really not enough. So I would say it's like a wave. There was a positive wave early on, and then it went down again. And interestingly enough, I think in the last couple of months, the issue has come back on the agenda. I'm not quite sure why, but yeah, I see it in comments and questions that we get. So I think, you know, also with the references to CEDA, Beijing Platform for Action, work that's being done by some other international organizations as well, that this is definitely something that at least I learned that we have to promote for more, and that we need more women to get active in this sphere. And if I look at, for instance, at finance for development work that's being done, there are women there, but also they're the minority. And that is very accessible also for organizations like ours to participate. So that may be something that you want to look into. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I see Danelle is online. Danelle, did you have any further discussion there?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear? Right. I think we've got transparency and traceability of money when we're giving funds overseas, but when we look at our domestic situation, we're not investigating how it's happening at home. So we're very particular when we're giving money to someone else, but we're not very good at looking at our own backyard. I think that's been the case for several countries that I've looked at. And unfortunately, if we should be applying the same, like the SDG traceability, but definitely the gender traceability internally, not just expect our recipients of funding to step up and not do it in their own backyard. That's just a comment, I think. Have other places experienced that?
Thank you. Relative to the research that I think is quite amazing from Women for Water, is there any plans, are there any plans to, for your next round would have to be in a year or two? It would have taken you a major amount of time, I would imagine.
Yes, it did. more than we counted on, actually, Lee. But that was also partly due to COVID, because we started the project originally, and then yeah, everybody was shut down. So there are a lot of people that we couldn't reach because they were not accessible. They were not even working in their offices, so very difficult to reach. And one really big problem that we encountered was that the policy people were all quite willing to speak to us. And then when we started asking questions about specifics, so what are your criteria? How does the accountancy system work? Things like that. Then most of the finance departments refused cooperation. They said, no, this is internal, and no, we can't give you that information. And in the end, some of it we got through friends, but that was a big hurdle. The next steps are a few. One is that we're waiting for the final approval of our research by the donor, and then hopefully can persuade them that we can continue with this activity for a while longer. There is the willingness of OECD and UN Water to look into it and see if we can jointly do something in the coming period. Which is, yeah, probably mainly on the methodology. And so, yeah, we're definitely going to
Yeah.
follow this
Indeed.
up. But we
The other thing is, of course, as well, Lesha, is that we got finance to do this research.
yes,
And that, again, is a very difficult process. And at the moment, we haven't been able to sort of identify the donor who could continue to finance us for a follow-up of this project.
correct.
It's just so valuable to have, and then the base to build upon to improve the lives of many, many women.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
So it's extremely important, and there's some international NGOs that are interested.
Yeah.
So the interest is there, but to follow up, we need to find some financing to be able to actually do it, because you can't do all this in volunteer time. It's impossible.
No.
Mhm,
And a
mhm.
lot of the time involved was volunteer time. So you know, you can't continue like that. And a lot of organizations expect that if women do these sort of things, that they'll do it voluntarily. So that's not done either. But then I also think that COVID didn't help the
No, definitely not.
gender equalities, the SDG 5 full stop. That I think we really made some step backwards. So
Yes.
we have to catch up with that again, which is a shame. But and we keep saying every sort of 5, 6, 7 years, well, this is the time. Now we'll go through, and then something happens, and we'll start again. But anyway, I think the Store Optimists are exactly in the same position, and we've done some wonderful projects together with good results, and we'll just have to continue.
Yeah, there's maybe one positive here. That I was approached by the Dutch government, that is responsible for development cooperation, and they are actually looking into a new strategy on gender and women's participation for the next few years. And they asked me specifically about this research that we've done for the local funding. So there seems to be an opening there, provided we get the right governments to actually approve
And
that.
we're still waiting for a new government. So, but apparently today they said there was going to be one before the summer. So let's hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Maria may be able to confirm what you were saying about what COVID has done to SDG 5. Maria, do you have a summary there or some comments?
No, just that, yeah, you're exactly right. It went backwards completely at all levels, because especially, you know, women were at the forefront, whether they were in health, but they are the lowest wage winners, and also they are predominant in the informal sector. So and then violence increased. So whichever way you look at it, COVID was terrible for women, terrible. And that's why there was this new impulse at, you know, in 2021 and 22 to make sure that the fiscal plans adjusted to this. Also, there was a lot of money poured during COVID by many governments. And we wanted that to remain, not to take it back after COVID ended. Unfortunately, after COVID ended, it was all about inflation and war. And but I see that I don't know if you were talking about this, Lisha, at the beginning, because I had to step out for a minute. But I think it does come and go in waves. I don't know if you were referring to gender budgeting, but
yeah, that's one part of it. Yes.
Yes. So today, what's going on today? Today, there's a new interest, but it's mainly by NGOs because governments are, inflation is going down, interest rates will go down, and so there is adjustment and there's debt to pay. There will be adjustment in all budgets, but we have to make sure, we have to demand really that if tightening occurs, it should be done very well calibrated, not to affect women. Because at the same time that I say that, I noticed throughout the year, I was there I was at the UN in September, and then I followed the Commission, of course, of Social Development. There is a real concern about poverty now. And if the tools are there, and about the feminization of poverty, and about the barriers to women, and there was a resolution passed that was not on the priority theme that in the Commission, that was about care. We were able to advocate for the summit on social development, and it's coming because there is a new realization that development hasn't happened, that COVID took us back, and that something has to be done. I find there is a new will, but of course it will depend on governments, but there are many that are committed. So yeah, I'm still thinking out loud. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's an easy subject. I mean, a lot of governments don't have gender budgeting or anything on women in their policies, and so it's easy to forget about it, instead of actually putting it forward. And if you have to reduce your governmental budget, I mean, what is easier than leaving the women out? And
exactly,
that is really what is happening. So and you can see all the things that come up with the Me Too, the sport, I think people are realizing that women have to, I mean, medication as well. Women need to be taken seriously, but before that sips down, it will take another couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
I just see
Probably.
that research showing such a major barrier between the women getting things done, the poverty that it causes, and the bureaucratic side. It just highlights so much.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the bureaucrats, I mean, they have no idea what it means to live in poverty. I mean, they just cannot even imagine what these women go through. So that's another thing. Then you can't, if you can't visualize, and if you don't have any understanding of how this must be for you, for the woman, for the family, for the children, and all the aspects that come with it, then you might as well, instead of being mind-boggled, you might as well forget about it.
Thank you. I'll just call for are there any last questions from the audience?
I think Marlene has a question about if there are any EU funds. I think there might be. I know that the Council of Europe has really passed some kind of decision or taken a position in favor of gender budgeting. It's encouraging, inviting member states to look at gender budgeting and include it. But the problem, as we saw, is not only to include, is to operationalize, is to implement. So I hope that there are some EU funds. I don't know.
Be nice to know. It'd be lovely to have one website for all monies for women.
Yeah.
It would be a dream.
Or if UN women were more open also with the information.
Oh, well.
Take the words,
don't start on
out
that.
of my mouth.
Don't start on that. Okay.
I mean, after all the wonderful work that you at UNIFEM did, as you rightly refer to, I mean, after the merger into UN Women, it completely died. It disappeared.
Yes, it disappeared. It diluted, and with other initiatives. Yeah, completely. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I think UNDP has money, and you know, and I don't know, I'm not good at that topic of where to go for the money, but I analyze it from a from a different perspective. But I know that UNDP is really something that we should rely on, because that's where the money is. That's where the money is.
That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'd now like to call on our SI President, Suyong Nanalingam, to have closing remarks. Thank you, President Suyong.
Hi. I don't know what to say because it's been really overwhelming. I must thank all of you. That is probably what I should be doing only, to thank all of you for the wonderful sharing of all the information that you have, the challenges that you all have brought up, and the frustrations I can hear sometimes about all the setbacks as well as going forward. But especially, I think the research that you have done, you have shared with us, it is so helpful to the NGOs who face the same issue. We do not have to, like you said, spend money or get women to go and volunteer to do this research. But of course, going forward, is another area. But as Lee said, we should be continuing, but it's not easy to get anyone to do this research. So the research details you shared with us, Lisha, is really wonderful. We learned a lot. And for sharing it with us, we are really, really grateful. And I think many of the NGOs who have been listening in will really, really appreciate what you have said or done. And of course, Maria, thank you so much for your telling us about the gender budgeting issues. Not so much about where to get the funds, but I did have one experience when you mentioned UNDP. In Malaysia, where I was involved in the Women Institute of Management, we had funding year after year about 20,000 pounds from the UNDP to help women in the villages and so on to improve their lives. So there is possibility, of course, of funding from many of the centers, but we need to find out where and who. So thank you so much for sharing. Particularly, I think now that we also have a foundation, we also need to learn how to go about it in a cleverer way and less challenging way, hopefully. And thank you to all your sharing. It will be very, very helpful to us too. And to Marie, our dear friend, you have been so involved with us for so many years, especially when you were the president. And now, of course, from the Women Partnership point of view, thank you so much for joining up with us, collaborating with us one more time, at least, to do this wonderful seminar. So thank you so much, everybody and everyone who are attending as well and sharing your thoughts on the chat. So thank you so much again. Thank you.